The massive alien warship loomed over Earth, its weapon ports glowing with barely contained energy. In the UN Security Council chamber, screens flickered to life, revealing the grotesque face of the Zarkonian Supreme Commander. Humans, the alien's voice boomed, translators struggling with the guttural language. Your planet stands in our way. Surrender or be obliterated. Silence fell. Then, a chuckle broke the tension. All eyes turned to the weathered face of General Sarah Chen, her scars a testament to humanity's violent past. With all due respect, Sarah said, standing slowly, you have no idea who you're dealing with. The alien's eyes narrowed. You dare laugh in the face of extinction. Sarah's smile faded. No, we laugh because we've been where you are. We've seen the precipice of self-destruction, and we chose a different path. She pressed a button, and holographic images sprang to life. Earth's history of warfare, from ancient battles to nuclear wastelands. This is why humans avoid war, Sarah continued, her voice steady. Now let us show you how to save yourselves from the same fate. The Zarkonian commander's expression shifted from contempt to curiosity. Little did he know, humanity's greatest battle, the fight for peace, was about to begin. The sleek diplomatic vessel Olive Branch dropped out of hyperspace, its hull shimmering as adaptive camouflage adjusted to the amber light of the Zarkonian sun. On the bridge, General Sarah Chen stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her weathered face a map of old scars and new determination. Status report, she commanded, voice steady despite the weight of their mission. All systems nominal, General, replied Dr. Aisha Patel, the team's lead synopsychologist. Her fingers danced over a holographic display, bringing up scans of the alien world below. Cloaking field is stable. The Zarkonians have no idea we're here. Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving the view of the turbulent planet. Storms raged across its surface, a visual metaphor for the conflict tearing the alien civilization apart. Let's hope we can keep it that way until we're ready to reveal ourselves. She turned to face her team, a hand-picked group of Earth's finest. Historian Dr. Marcus Lee, his augmented eyes rapidly processing data on Zarkonian culture. Combat veteran and peace negotiator Colonel Jamal Mbeek, his prosthetic arm a reminder of humanity's violent past. And the team's AI specialist, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, interfacing directly with the ship's quantum computer. You all know why we're here, Sarah began, her voice low but intense. The Zarkonians stand on the brink of a war that could wipe out their entire species. Sound familiar? Grim nods answered her. Every human knew the story of the last war, the conflict that had nearly ended Earth a century ago. We have a chance to prevent that here, Sarah continued, to save an entire civilization from making the same mistakes we did. It won't be easy. The Zarkonians are more technologically advanced than us in many ways. They're proud, divided, and spoiling for a fight. She paused, making eye contact with each team member. But we have something they don't. Experience. We've walked the path they're on, and we found a way off it. Now it's our job to show them that way. Dr. Lee raised a hand. General, our initial scans show their weapon systems are, well, they're beyond anything we've ever seen. If they decide to turn those on us, then we'll have failed. Sarah cut him off. And we'll likely die. But that's a risk we have to take. The stakes are too high to play it safe. She turned back to the view screen, zooming in on a sprawling Zarkonian city. We're not here as conquerors or even saviors. We're here as witnesses, as living proof that there's a better way. Our job is to make them listen long enough to see that for themselves. Colonel Meek stepped forward, his voice deep and resolute. And if they won't listen? Sarah's face hardened. Then we make them listen. We've got a few tricks up our sleeves. Dr. Tanaka, how's our war simulator coming along? Yuki's eyes flickered with data streams as she interfaced with the AI. Final calibrations are complete, General. The system is ready to model any conflict scenario with 99.98% accuracy. Good, Sarah nodded. That might be our ace in the hole. Sometimes you have to show someone the abyss before they'll back away from it. The general took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. We have 12 hours before we make our presence known. I want everyone ready for any possible reaction, from open arms to open warfare. Dr. Patel, continue monitoring their communications. Dr. Lee, I want a final briefing on their cultural pressure points. Colonel Mbeke, run drills with security. And Dr. Tanaka, have that war simulator ready to deploy at a moment's notice. As her team dispersed to their tasks, Sarah turned back to the view of the alien world. In her mind's eye, she saw Earth as it had been a century ago, racked by war, teetering on the edge of annihilation. She remembered the fire, the fear, the desperation. Never again, she whispered to herself. Not for us, and not for them. With a determined nod, General Sarah Chen strode off the bridge. In a matter of hours, they would attempt the impossible, to turn an alien species away from the brink of self-destruction, armed with nothing but wisdom born of humanity's own bitter experience. The fate of an entire civilization hung in the balance, and the real work was about to begin. The Zarkonian central chamber was a cauldron of tension. Holographic displays flickered with images of devastation, cities reduced to ash, vast swathes of land rendered uninhabitable. The war simulator had done its job, showing the Zarkonians a future they could scarcely comprehend. General Sarah Chen stood at the center of it all, her face illuminated by the harsh glow of the projections. Around her, the alien leaders of both factions sat in stunned silence, their iridescent scales dulled by shock and fear. This, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the quiet, is what awaits you if you continue down this path. Total annihilation. The end of everything you've built, everything you are. Supreme Commander Zalthor, leader of the dominant Zarkonian faction, rose to his full height. His voice was a low rumble, translator struggling to convey the mix of anger and disbelief. Impossible. Our weapons are precise. Our shields, impenetrable. This level of destruction is exactly what we thought. Sarah interrupted, her eyes hard. Humans once believed our technology could guarantee a clean war. We were wrong. Catastrophically wrong. She gestured, and the holographic display shifted. Now it showed Earth, or rather, what Earth had become in the aftermath of the last war. Continents scared by nuclear fire, oceans poisoned, the atmosphere choked with dust. This was our home, a century ago. Sarah continued. We thought we could control the chaos of war. We were fools. From the other side of the chamber, Merlak, leader of the rebel Zarkonian faction, spoke up. His voice was softer, tinged with a growing horror. But you survived. Your world recovered. Sarah nodded grimly. At a cost you can't imagine. Billions dead, centuries of progress wiped out in days. It took everything we had left to pull ourselves back from the brink of extinction. She waved her hand again, and the holograms vanished, leaving the chamber in semi-darkness. In the dim light, Sarah could see the Zarkonians differently now. Their alien features, once so strange and threatening, now seemed vulnerable, scared. I know what you're feeling right now, she said, her voice softening. The anger, the fear, the certainty that your cause is just, that victory is the only option. I felt it all. Sarah took a deep breath, then did something that made her security team tense up. She walked closer to the alien leaders, unarmed, unprotected. But I've also felt something you haven't yet, she continued. The crushing weight of knowing you've led your people to ruin. The guilt that comes with surviving when so many didn't. The desperate, clawing hope that somehow, someway, you can make things right. She looked from Zalthor to Merlak, holding their gazes. You have a choice now. A chance we never had. You can step back from this precipice. You can choose a different path. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then, slowly, Almost imperceptibly, Supreme Commander Zalthor's aggressive posture began to soften. "How?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do we stop this momentum towards destruction?" Sarah allowed herself a small, sad smile. "It starts with this, with being willing to ask that question. To admit that maybe, just maybe, there's a better way than annihilating each other." Murloc shifted in his seat, his bioluminescent patches pulsing with agitation. "But our differences, the sacred texts clearly state." "Your sacred texts," Sarah interrupted gently, "were written by mortal beings, weren't they? Beings capable of misunderstanding, of making mistakes." The rebel leader fell silent, his inner conflict visible even to human eyes. Sarah pressed on. "We've brought more than just warnings. We have experience, hard-won, blood-soaked experience, in building peace from the ashes of war. We can help you find common ground, to see each other not as enemies, but as fellow Zarkonians, fellow living beings with hopes, fears, and a shared future." She gestured to her team, standing ready at the edges of the chamber. "We have historians who can help you untangle the roots of your conflict. Mediators trained in finding solutions where none seem possible. Technologies that can help ease resource scarcity and reduce tensions." Zalthor and Murloc exchanged looks. Centuries of hostility hung between them, but something new was there too. A glimmer of uncertainty, of possibility. "It won't be easy," Sarah admitted. "Peace is often harder than war. It requires more courage, more sacrifice of pride. But I promise you, it's worth it." She straightened up, her voice taking on a hint of her battlefield command tone. "So I ask you now, leaders of the Zarkonian people, are you brave enough to wage peace?" The chamber erupted in a flurry of discussion, Zarkonian voices rising and falling in their musical language. But beneath the chaos, Sarah could sense a shift. The hostility that had permeated the air since their arrival was fading, replaced by something more tentative, more hopeful. As she watched the alien leaders begin to truly talk to each other, perhaps for the first time in generations, Sarah allowed herself to believe. This was the moment, the fulcrum upon which the fate of an entire civilization would turn. The war that never had just been won. Dr. Marcus Lee stood before a holographic display of Zarkonian history, his augmented eyes rapidly processing the alien script. Around him, a mixed group of human experts and Zarkonian scholars watched intently, the tension in the room palpable. "It all comes down to this," Marcus said, zooming in on an ancient text. "The sundering of the twin moons." The Zarkonians shifted uneasily, their scaled skin shimmering in the low light. One of them, a historian named Zelera, spoke up. "But that's just a myth, a story we tell hatchlings. It can't be the cause of our conflict." Marcus smiled gently. "Earth's history is full of conflicts rooted in ancient myths. Sometimes, the older the story, the more power it holds." He manipulated the hologram, showing the twin moons of the Zarkonian homeworld. "According to your legends, these moons were once a single celestial body, split by the gods as a sign of their displeasure. But our astronomical data suggests a different story." The hologram shifted, showing a simulation of a massive impact event. The Zarkonians watched in awe as a small planetoid collided with their original moon, splitting it in two. "This event," Marcus continued, "coincides with a major climate shift in your planet's history. Suddenly, resources became scarce, and that's when we see the first mentions of the two main Zarkonian factions." Zelera's eyes widened. "The Skyward and the Earthbound." Marcus nodded. "Exactly. One group believed the splitting of the moon was a sign to look to the stars for salvation. The other saw it as a call to focus on preserving what you had." He brought up images of early Zarkonian settlements. This ideological split influenced everything, from resource allocation to technological development. Over time, these differences became more pronounced, more fundamental to your identities. Another Zarkonian, this one wearing the insignia of a military officer, spoke up. But that was thousands of cycles ago. How can it still be driving our conflict? Dr. Aisha Patel stepped forward, her voice calm and measured. Cultural memory is a powerful force. These ancient divisions have been reinforced over generations, built into your education systems, your political structures, even your family units. She gestured to a series of brain scans. We've observed that Zarkonians from different factions actually process information differently. You're not just divided by ideology, but by how you perceive the world itself. A murmur ran through the assembled Zarkonians. Marcus could see the shock, the disbelief, but also a glimmer of recognition. This is why previous attempts at reconciliation have failed, he said gently. You've been trying to resolve surface-level disputes without addressing the fundamental schism at the heart of your society. The military officer's posture slumped slightly. Then, is there no hope? Are we doomed to fight until one side is destroyed? Marcus and Aisha exchanged a look. It was time for the hard truth. There's always hope, Marcus said firmly. But it requires something incredibly difficult. You need to be willing to question the very foundations of your worldviews. Aisha nodded. It means acknowledging that perhaps both the skyward and the earthbound philosophies have value. That your strength as a species lies not in one path or the other, but in the combination of both. The room fell silent as the Zarkonians grappled with this idea. Centuries of ingrained beliefs and prejudices didn't disappear in an instant, but Marcus could see wheels turning, perspectives shifting ever so slightly. Zell Era was the first to speak. If what you say is true, how do we even begin to bridge such a vast divide? Marcus smiled. That's where we come in. Humans have faced similar challenges. We've developed techniques for overcoming deep-seated cultural conflicts. He brought up new holograms, showing human history, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of apartheid in South Africa, the Great Reconciliation after the last war. It won't be easy, Marcus admitted. It will require courage, open-mindedness, and a willingness to feel uncomfortable. But it's possible. We've done it. You can too. As the Zarkonians began to discuss among themselves, their voices a mix of excitement and apprehension, Marcus felt a surge of hope. This was just the beginning, but it was a crucial step. Understanding the root of the conflict was the first step towards resolving it. He caught Aisha's eye and saw his own optimism reflected there. They both knew there was still a long way to go, but for the first time since arriving on this war-torn world, the path to peace seemed clear. The Zarkonians were finally ready to confront their past, to question their assumptions, and to imagine a future where their differences could be a source of strength rather than conflict. It was a small step, but a vital one. As the discussions grew more animated, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. This was why they had come, why they had risked so much. Not to impose human solutions, but to guide the Zarkonians towards finding their own path to reconciliation. The journey ahead would be challenging, but the first, crucial step had been taken. The roots of the conflict had been exposed to the light of understanding, and in that light, the seeds of peace had begun to sprout. The decision to split the human diplomatic team was not made lightly. General Sarah Chen stood before her crew, her face etched with determination and concern. We need to understand both sides intimately if we're going to bridge this divide, she explained. That means embedding ourselves with both the skyward and the earthbound factions. Colonel Jamal Mbik stepped forward, his prosthetic arm gleaming in the ship's light. It's risky, General, if either side decides we're a threat. Sarah nodded grimly. I know, but it's a risk we have to take. We didn't come all this way to play it safe. The team divided according to their expertise. Dr. Aisha Patel and Dr. Marcus Lee would join Sarah in working with the skyward leadership, while Colonel Meek and Dr. Yuki Tanaka would embed with the earthbound faction. As they prepared to depart, Sarah addressed her team one last time. Remember, we're not here to take sides. Our job is to listen, to understand, and to plant the seeds of reconciliation wherever we can. Stay alert, stay open-minded, and above all, stay in contact. With a final exchange of determined looks, the two groups set off for their respective assignments. Sarah's team arrived at the Skyward capital, a breathtaking city of soaring spires and anti-gravity platforms. They were greeted by Supreme Commander Zolthor, his scales shimmering with barely contained suspicion. "Welcome, humans," he rumbled, the translator struggling to convey his complex tones. "I hope you understand the unprecedented nature of this arrangement." Sarah stepped forward, meeting his gaze steadily. "We do, Commander, and we appreciate your willingness to let us observe and learn." As they were led through the city, Aisha and Marcus activated their subtle scanning devices, collecting data on Skyward culture and technology. The differences from Earthbound territories were stark. Everything here pointed upward, reaching for the stars. Meanwhile, Jamal and Yuki found themselves in the heart of Earthbound territory. The contrast was striking. Where the Skyward city stretched towards the heavens, Earthbound settlements burrowed into the planet itself, creating vast underground networks. Merlak, the Earthbound leader, greeted them with cautious curiosity. "I must admit, I'm still not sure what to make of you humans," he said, leading them through winding tunnels. "But if there's even a chance you can help end this conflict." Yuki nodded, her cybernetic implants processing the wealth of data around them. "We're here to listen and learn, Leader Merlak. Your perspective is crucial to finding a path forward." As the days passed, both teams immersed themselves in their respective factions. Sarah and her group attended Skyward Council meetings, witnessing firsthand the ambitious plans for space exploration and colonization. They saw the pride the Skyward took in their technological achievements, but also sensed an underlying fear, a desperate need to escape a planet they believed was doomed. Aisha's keen psychological insight proved invaluable. "They're not just reaching for the stars," she reported during a secure communication. "They're running from something. There's a deep-seated anxiety driving their actions." Marcus, meanwhile, delved into Skyward historical records. "Their interpretation of the twin moons' sundering has become almost messianic," he observed. "They see themselves as chosen to lead their species to salvation among the stars." In Earthbound territory, Jamal and Yuki were making equally important discoveries. They joined Earthbound work crews, experiencing the intense focus on sustainable living and resource management. The Earthbound's connection to their planet was profound, almost spiritual. "They don't just live on this world," Jamal reported back. "They see themselves as part of it. The idea of abandoning it is anathema to them." Yuki's analysis of Earthbound technology revealed surprising advancements. "Their bioengineering is incredible," she marveled. "They're not stagnating. They're evolving, but in harmony with their environment, not in an attempt to escape it." As the human team shared their observations, a clearer picture began to emerge. The conflict between Skyward and Earthbound wasn't just about resources or territory. It was a fundamental schism in how they viewed their place in the universe. But amid the differences, Sarah and her team also began to see commonalities. Both factions fiercely loved their people. Both were driven by a desire to ensure the survival and prosperity of the Zarkonian species. They simply had radically different ideas about how to achieve that goal. During a secure video conference, the human team reunited virtually to share their findings. "We need to help them see that their approaches aren't mutually exclusive," Sarah said, her voice firm with conviction. "The Skyward's drive to explore and the Earthbound's commitment to their homeworld. These could be complementary strengths, not sources of conflict." Jamal nodded in agreement. "If we can get them to collaborate instead of compete, the potential is staggering." Earthbound sustainability combined with Skyward space exploration, they could become a powerhouse of balanced progress. The team discussed strategies late into the night, drawing on Earth's own history of overcoming deep ideological divides. It wouldn't be easy. Centuries of mistrust and misunderstanding couldn't be erased overnight. But as they talked, a plan began to take shape. "Tomorrow," Sarah said as they concluded their meeting, we start bringing them together. Not for negotiations, not yet, but for something more fundamental, for understanding. As the communication ended and Sarah looked out over the glittering skyward city, she felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. They were walking a tightrope, trying to guide two deeply divided factions towards reconciliation without overstepping or being seen as taking sides. It was a daunting task, but as she remembered the devastation of Earth's last war, Sarah steeled her resolve. They had to succeed. The alternative was too devastating to contemplate. With a deep breath, she began preparing for the next phase of their mission. The real challenge was just beginning. The cavernous chamber hummed with tension as Zarkonian leaders from both factions gathered, their bioluminescent patches flickering with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. At the center stood Dr. Yuki Tanaka, her cybernetic implants glowing softly as she interfaced with the imposing machine before her, the war simulator. "What you're about to witness," Yuki began, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of gravity, "is a glimpse into possible futures. Futures shaped by the choices you make today." Supreme Commander Zal Thor of the Skyward faction stepped forward, his scales shimmering with skepticism. "And we're to believe this machine can predict the outcome of a war that hasn't happened?" Yuki nodded, her expression serious. "It's more than prediction, Commander. The war simulator uses advanced quantum computing and predictive algorithms, combined with all the data we've gathered about your civilization, to model millions of potential conflict scenarios." Merlak, the Earthbound leader, spoke up. "How can we trust its accuracy? Our technologies, our strategies, they're unique to our world." "An excellent question," Yuki replied. She gestured and holographic displays sprang to life around the room. "Before we came to your world, we used this technology to model historical conflicts from Earth's past. Allow me to demonstrate." A hologram shifted, showing scenes from human history. World War II, the Cold War, more recent regional conflicts. As Yuki narrated, the simulator played out these wars, showing outcomes that matched historical reality with eerie precision. In each case, Yuki explained, the simulator accurately predicted not just the military outcomes, but the long-term societal, economic, and environmental impacts. The Zarkonian leaders watched in stunned silence. Even the most skeptical among them couldn't deny the implications. "Now," Yuki continued, her voice taking on a more somber tone, "let's look at your world." The holograms shifted again, this time showing a detailed model of the Zarkonian planet. Yuki input commands, and the simulation began. What followed was a nightmare made visible. The leaders watched as simulated fleets clashed in orbit, as advanced weapons laid waste to cities and ecosystems. They saw the cascading effects: economic collapse, famine, the breakdown of society. But the simulation didn't stop there. It played out years, decades, centuries into the future. The Zarkonians witnessed the long-term consequences of their war. A devastated planet, a fractured species struggling to survive, the dream of reaching the stars turned to ash. As the simulation ended, a heavy silence fell over the chamber. The Zarkonian leaders stood motionless, many visibly shaken by what they'd seen. Zal Thor was the first to speak, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. This can't be the only possible outcome." Yuki nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "You're right, Commander. This is just one potential future. The beauty of this technology is that we can model different scenarios, different choices." She turned back to the simulator, inputting new parameters. "Let's see what happens if, instead of war, you choose a path of cooperation." The holograms sprang to life once more. This time, the Zarkonians watched as their simulated selves put aside their differences. They saw joint projects merging skyward technology with earthbound sustainability. They witnessed their civilization flourishing, expanding to other planets while maintaining a thriving homeworld. As this new simulation concluded, the mood in the chamber had shifted dramatically. Where before there had been tension and hostility, now there was a palpable sense of possibility. Merlak stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the fading hologram of a prosperous future. How certain is this outcome? Yuki's expression was gentle but firm. Nothing is certain, Leader Merlak. The future is not set in stone. This simulator doesn't predict what will happen, but what could happen based on the choices you make. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each Zarkonian leader. The path you choose is up to you. We can't make that decision for you, but we can show you the potential consequences of your choices. General Sarah Chen, who had been observing silently, now stepped forward. We've seen both these futures on Earth, she said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. We've known the devastation of war and the prosperity of cooperation. That's why we're here, not to tell you what to do, but to show you what's possible. The Zarkonian leaders began to discuss among themselves, their voices a mix of concern, hope, and lingering doubt. But there was something new in their interactions, a willingness to listen to each other that hadn't been there before. As the discussions continued, Yuki caught Sarah's eye. They both knew that the war simulator was just a tool. The real work, the hard work of building trust, of finding common ground, was still ahead. But for the first time since they'd arrived on this war-torn world, they could see a path forward. The war simulator had done its job. It had shown the Zarkonians a mirror of their possible futures, and in doing so, had planted the seeds of change. Now it was up to the Zarkonians to choose which future they would cultivate. The mood on the Zarkonian homeworld had shifted palpably in the days following the war simulator demonstration, where once there had been open hostility between the Skyward and Earthbound factions. Now there were tentative discussions, cultural exchanges, even joint scientific projects. But not everyone was pleased with this turn of events. Colonel Jamal Mbik stood at the entrance of a small earthbound settlement, his enhanced senses on high alert. Something wasn't right. The streets were too quiet, the few Zarkonians he saw moving with a nervous energy that set his teeth on edge. Dr. Tanaka, he vocalized into his comm unit, "Are you picking up anything unusual?" Yuki's voice came back, tense but controlled. "Affirmative. I'm detecting encrypted communications bursts. Someone's coordinating something big, and they don't want us to know about it." Jamal's hand instinctively moved to his side, where a non-lethal stun weapon was concealed. "Alert the general. I think we're about to." His words were cut off by a deafening explosion. The ground shook, and Jamal's combat training kicked in instantly. He dove for cover, pulling a stunned Zarkonian civilian with him as debris rained down. Across the planet, similar scenes were unfolding. In the Skyward capital, Sarah Chen was in the middle of a promising negotiation session when alarms began blaring. "We're under attack." Supreme Commander Zalthor roared, his scales flashing danger patterns. "The Earthbound have betrayed us." But Sarah's eyes were fixed on her data pad, which was displaying a tactical overview of the planet. "It's not just you," she said grimly. "The Earthbound territories are under attack too. This isn't one faction against the other. This is something else." As if in response to her words, every communication device in the room crackled to life. A voice, distorted but filled with fanatical fervor, echoed through the chambers. "People of Zarkon, too long have we been weakened by talks of peace. Our leaders would have us join hands with our enemies, forgetting centuries of righteous struggle. We will not allow this. Today, we take back our destiny." Sarah's mind raced. This was the nightmare scenario, a third faction, composed of hardliners from both sides, unwilling to accept the prospect of peace. "Commander," she said, turning to the shocked Zalthor, "we need to act fast. If we don't stop this now, everything we've worked for will be lost." In the Earthbound territories, Jamal and Yuki were already moving. They had trained for this possibility, hoping it would never come to pass. Now, as they coordinated with loyal Zarkonian security forces, they saw the fruits of their preparation. Yuki's fingers flew over her holo interface, hacking into the insurgents' communication networks. I'm feeding false information to their units, she reported. It should slow them down, maybe even turn some of them against each other. Jamal, meanwhile, was leading a mixed team of humans and Zarkonians in a counteroffensive. His non-lethal weapons proved devastatingly effective against opponents who had never encountered such technology. Remember, he shouted to his team as they advanced, our goal is to subdue, not destroy. These aren't our enemies. They're misguided citizens we need to bring back into the fold. Back in the scoured capital, Sarah was facing a different kind of battle. As reports of attacks flooded in, she could see the old mistrust and anger rising in the eyes of the Zarkonian leaders. This is why peace is impossible, one counselor raged. We should have crushed the Earthbound when we had the chance. Sarah's voice cut through the growing chaos like a whip crack. No, this is exactly what the insurgents want. To drive you apart, to reignite the conflict. Don't let them succeed. She turned to Zalthor, her eyes blazing with intensity. Commander, you've seen what war will do to your people. Are you going to let a handful of extremists drag you back into that future? For a moment, the fate of two civilizations hung in the balance. Then, slowly, Zalthor nodded. You're right, he said, his voice regaining its strength. We will not be manipulated into destroying ourselves. He began issuing orders, not for retaliation, but for a coordinated response with the Earthbound leadership. Sarah felt a surge of pride. The Zarkonians were choosing cooperation over conflict, even in the face of provocation. As the day wore on, the tide began to turn. Jamal and Yuki's efforts in the field, combined with the united response of the Zarkonian leadership, began to overwhelm the insurgents. By nightfall, the main forces of the rebellion had been subdued. There were casualties, yes, but far fewer than there might have been without the humans' intervention and the Zarkonians' newfound unity. As the adrenaline of battle faded, Sarah found herself in a room with leaders from both factions. The atmosphere was somber, but there was something else there too, a sense of shared purpose that hadn't existed before. Merlak, the Earthbound leader, broke the silence. We owe you a debt, humans, he said softly. Without your presence, your technology, your wisdom, this day could have ended very differently. Zalthor nodded in agreement. Indeed, you showed us a better path, and when it was tested, you stood with us to defend it. Sarah looked at each of them in turn. We gave you tools and information, she said, but the choice was yours. You chose peace, even when it would have been easier to fall back into old patterns. That courage, that's all you. As the Zarkonian leaders began to discuss plans for rebuilding and reconciliation, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more moments of crisis. But today, faced with the ultimate test, the Zarkonians had chosen unity over division, hope over fear. It was more than a victory. It was a transformation. And for the first time since their arrival, Sarah truly believed that they would succeed in their mission. The Zarkonians had taken their first, crucial steps towards a lasting peace. Despite the initial victory over the insurgents, pockets of resistance remained. The most formidable of these was a heavily fortified base hidden in the mountains between scoured and earthbound territories. Intelligence suggested it housed the masterminds behind the coordinated attacks, along with a stockpile of devastating weapons. General Sarah Chen stood before a mixed group of human team members and Zarkonian leaders, her face grim as she outlined the situation. This isn't just a military target, she explained, gesturing to the holographic map. It's a symbol. As long as it stands, it represents the possibility of renewed conflict. We need to neutralize it, and we need to do it in a way that brings your people together, not drives them apart. Supreme Commander Zalthor nodded, his scales shimmering with determination. Agreed, but their defenses are formidable. A direct assault would result in heavy casualties. Which is why we're not going to give them the battle they're expecting. Sarah replied, a glint in her eye. She turned to Dr. Yuki Tanaka. "Doctor, it's time to unveil our secret weapon." Yuki stepped forward, activating a holographic display of what looked like a swarm of metallic insects. "We call it the hive mind disruptor," she explained. "These nanobots can infiltrate their communication and weapon systems, temporarily disabling them without causing permanent damage." Merlak, the Earthbound leader, leaned forward with interest. "Fascinating. But how do we deploy them without being detected?" This time, it was Colonel Jamal Mbik who answered. "That's where we come in," he said, standing tall. "A small joint team of humans and Zarkonians will infiltrate the base using our adaptive camouflage technology. We'll release the nanobots from within." The plan was risky, but after hours of discussion and refinement, both Zarkonian factions agreed it was their best option. As the strike team prepared for their mission, Sarah pulled Jamal aside. "This is it, Colonel," she said softly. "Everything we've worked for comes down to this. Be careful out there." Jamal nodded, his expression serious. "We'll get it done, General. For Earth and for Zarkon." As night fell, the joint strike team moved out. Jamal led from the front, his enhanced senses and combat experience proving invaluable as they navigated the treacherous mountain terrain. Beside him, Zarkonian soldiers moved with a grace that belied their size, their bioluminescent patches dimmed to near invisibility. They reached the outer perimeter of the base undetected, but that's when things started to go wrong. An automated sensor, more advanced than their intelligence had suggested, picked up their presence. Alarms blared, and suddenly the night was alive with weapon fire. "Plan B," Jamal shouted, activating his combat shields. "Yuki, deploy the disruptors. Now." Back at the command center, Yuki's fingers flew over her console. The swarm of nanobots was released, racing towards the base faster than the eye could follow. But would they be in time? On the battlefield, Jamal and his team fought with everything they had. Human stun weapons flashed alongside Zarkonian energy blasts, dropping insurgents left and right. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. Just as it seemed they would be overwhelmed, the hive mind disruptors reached their target. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Enemy weapons sputtered and died. Communication devices emitted only static. In the sudden silence, the insurgents' confidence faltered. Seizing the moment, Jamal rallied his forces. "Now, push forward. Remember, subdue, don't destroy." The tide of battle turned. As more Zarkonian reinforcements arrived, the insurgents found themselves facing a united front of scoured and earthbound soldiers fighting side by side. It was a sight many of them had never imagined possible, and it shook their resolve to the core. In the command center, Sarah watched the battle unfold with tense focus. Beside her, Zalthor and Merlak stood shoulder to shoulder, issuing joint orders to their troops. The sight filled her with pride and hope. As dawn broke over the mountains, the last of the insurgents surrendered. The battle was won, not through overwhelming force, but through unity, technology, and a shared commitment to a peaceful future. Jamal's voice crackled over the comm. "Base secured, General. Minimal casualties on both sides. It's over." A cheer went up in the command center. Zarkonians from both factions embraced, their past divisions forgotten in the joy of shared victory. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. They had done it. They had shown the Zarkonians a better way. As the sun rose higher, casting its light over a landscape no longer divided by conflict, Sarah knew that this was more than just a military victory. It was the dawn of a new era for Zarkon, one of cooperation and shared progress. The war that never had been averted. Now, the real work of building a lasting peace could begin. In the days following the decisive battle, an air of cautious optimism settled over the Zarkonian world. The joint victory had done more than just neutralize the insurgent threat. It had demonstrated the power of unity to a species long divided. Now, as the dust settled, it was time to capitalize on this momentum. General Sarah Chen stood at the center of the Grand Conclave, a massive amphitheater hastily constructed in the neutral zone between Skyward and Earthbound territories. Around her, thousands of Zarkonians from both factions filled the seats, their bioluminescent patches creating a sea of shifting colors. People of Zarkon. Sarah began, her voice amplified to reach every corner of the vast space. You stand at a crossroads. The path you choose today will determine not just your future, but potentially the future of this entire sector of the galaxy. She gestured and holographic images sprang to life, showing scenes from the recent conflict, but also moments of cooperation and shared triumph. You've seen what you can accomplish when you work together, she continued. But the choice to continue down this path is yours alone. We humans can advise, can share our experiences, but we cannot and will not make this decision for you. A murmur ran through the crowd. Many had expected the humans to take a more directive role, to impose peace from the outside. This approach was unexpected, and for some, unsettling. Supreme Commander Zalthor stepped forward, his imposing figure drawing all eyes. The human speaks truth, he rumbled. For too long we skyward have looked to the stars, believing our salvation lay in escape. We saw the earthbound as anchors, holding us back. He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience. We were wrong. Our recent experiences have shown that our greatest strength lies not in division, but in unity. The earthbound's deep connection to our world, combined with our technological advancements. Together, we could achieve wonders beyond imagining. As Zalthor stepped back, Merlak, the earthbound leader, took his place. His voice was softer but no less intense. For generations, we earthbound have distrusted the skyward, seeing their ambitions as a threat to our way of life. We clung to tradition, fearing change. Merlak's bioluminescent patches pulsed with emotion. But stagnation is its own form of death. The humans have shown us that progress and tradition can coexist, can even strengthen each other. We need not fear the stars, nor must we abandon our roots to reach them. As the two leaders spoke, Sarah watched the crowd carefully. She could see the conflict in their eyes, the struggle between centuries of ingrained hostility, and the tantalizing possibility of a united future. This was the crucial moment, the fulcrum upon which everything balanced. Dr. Aisha Patel stepped forward, her voice gentle but carrying. Change is never easy, she said. It requires us to question our deepest beliefs, to step out of our comfort zones. But it also offers the greatest rewards. She activated a holographic display, showing the war simulator's projection of a united Zarkonian future. The audience gasped as they saw gleaming cities that harmoniously blended skyward and earthbound aesthetics, spacecraft launching from lush, protected landscapes, and Zarkonian colonies on distant worlds. This future is within your grasp, Aisha continued. But it requires more than just a ceasefire or a political agreement. It requires a fundamental shift in how you see yourselves and each other. It requires trust, empathy, and the courage to forgive. As she stepped back, a hush fell over the amphitheater. The tension was palpable. Sarah held her breath, knowing that the next few moments would determine the success or failure of their entire mission. Then, from the middle of the crowd, a voice rang out. I lost my clutch mate to a skyward attack 3 cycles ago, a earthbound Zarkonian said, his voice thick with emotion. I've carried that hatred for so long. But I'm tired. Tired of the fear, tired of the anger. If there's even a chance for a better future, I want to try. Another voice, this time from the skyward section. My ancestor was one of the first to propose reaching for the stars. She believed it was the only way to save our species. But seeing what we can accomplish together, I think she would be proud to see us finding our salvation here, united, on our homeworld. More voices joined in, a cascade of shared stories, of pain acknowledged and hope embraced. Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she watched lifelong enemies reach out to each other, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Zalthor and Merlak exchanged a look, then stepped forward together. In a gesture that would be remembered for generations, they clasped hands, their bioluminescent patches synchronizing in a dazzling display. "Let this be the dawn of a new era for Zarkon," they declared in unison. "No longer skyward and earthbound, but one people, with the wisdom to cherish our world and the courage to reach for the stars." The amphitheater erupted in cheers and trills of excitement. As Sarah watched, she saw Zarkonians from both factions embracing, their old divisions melting away in the face of a shared vision for the future. It wasn't the end of all problems, she knew. There would be challenges ahead, old wounds that would take time to heal fully. But this was more than she had dared to hope for. A genuine turning point, a moment when an entire civilization chose to change its course. As the celebration continued around her, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. They had done it. They had helped the Zarkonians find a path to peace, not by imposing human solutions, but by guiding them to discover their own strength in unity. The war that never was had been averted, and in its place, a future of boundless potential was born. In the weeks following the Grand Conclave, the euphoria of newfound unity gave way to the practical challenges of implementing lasting change. The human team, led by General Sarah Chen, found themselves busier than ever, working alongside Zarkonian leaders to forge a sustainable path forward. Dr. Marcus Lee stood before a mixed group of skyward and earthbound educators, his augmented eyes scanning the curious faces before him. "The key to lasting peace," he explained, "lies in education. We need to rewrite your history books, not to erase the past, but to present a more balanced view that acknowledges both perspectives." The educators nodded, though some looked uncertain. An elderly earthbound spoke up, her voice quavering. "But how do we teach about conflicts where our side was clearly wronged?" Marcus smiled gently. "By teaching empathy alongside facts, help students understand the motivations on both sides, the fears and hopes that drove actions. It's not about assigning blame, but about understanding." Across the planet, similar scenes were unfolding. Colonel Jamal Meek worked with military leaders from both factions, overseeing the integration of their forces into a unified Zarkonian defense corps. "Your differences are your strength," Jamal insisted, as skyward and earthbound officers eyed each other warily. The skyward's expertise in aerospace and the earthbound's mastery of subterranean operations, combined, they make you a formidable defensive force. To demonstrate, he ran them through joint exercises, carefully designed to showcase how their diverse skills could complement each other. Slowly, grudging respect began to replace old rivalries. Meanwhile, Dr. Yuki Tanaka was tackling perhaps the most ambitious project of all, the merger of skyward and earthbound technologies. In a vast laboratory filled with a dizzying array of equipment, she moved from station to station, her cybernetic implants interfacing seamlessly with Zarkonian tech. "Imagine," she said to a group of awestruck scientists, "spacecraft powered by earthbound bioengineering, or underground cities protected by skyward shield technology. Apart, your technological paths were impressive. Together, they're revolutionary." Her enthusiasm was infectious. Soon, skyward and earthbound scientists who had once guarded their secrets jealously were sharing ideas, building on each other's work with growing excitement. Dr. Aisha Patil faced a different kind of challenge. In community centers across the planet, she led reconciliation workshops, creating safe spaces for Zarkonians to share their pain, their fears, and their hopes. "Healing takes time," she reminded a group of participants, many of whom had lost loved ones in past conflicts. "It's okay to feel anger, to grieve. But it's also important to listen, to try to understand each other. That's how we break the cycle of violence." The sessions were often emotional, sometimes volatile. But slowly, story by story, a new narrative began to emerge, one of shared suffering and shared resilience. General Sarah Chen, for her part, worked closely with Zalthor and Merilak on the political restructuring of Zarkonian society. The challenge was to create a system that respected the unique cultures of both factions while forging a unified government. Think of it as unity, not uniformity, Sarah advised as they pored over draft constitutions. Your differences are part of what makes your civilization unique. The goal is to channel those differences into productive dialogue, not to erase them. After much debate, they settled on a bicameral system, one house representing regional interests, another focused on global concerns. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As the months passed, the changes began to take root. Joint scientific projects yielded breakthroughs that benefited all Zarkonians. The integrated military proved its worth by efficiently responding to natural disasters. Schools reported increased empathy and decreased bullying among students of different backgrounds. There were setbacks, of course. Old prejudices didn't disappear overnight. Economic integration led to short-term dislocations. Some hardliners on both sides resisted the changes. But with each challenge, the Zarkonians found themselves turning not to conflict, but to dialogue and collaborative problem-solving. The skills they were learning, the new perspectives they were gaining, proved as valuable in peacetime as they had in averting war. 1 year after their arrival, the human team stood on a hilltop overlooking a bustling Zarkonian city. The skyline was a harmonious blend of soaring skyward architecture and earthbound organic designs. In the streets below, Zarkonians of all backgrounds mingled freely. Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she took in the scene. "We did it," she said softly. "We really did it." Jamal nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We showed them the door. They chose to walk through it. And now they're building something beautiful," Aisha finished. As they watched, a spacecraft launched from a nearby spaceport, its hull gleaming with the unmistakable sheen of earthbound biotech. It rose steadily, carrying the hopes and dreams of a united Zarkon towards the stars. The war that never was had given birth to a peace beyond their wildest hopes. And as the human team prepared for their journey home, they knew they were leaving behind not just a planet saved, but a civilization transformed. The Zarkonians had chosen unity over division, hope over fear. And in doing so, they had written a new chapter not just in their own history, but in the history of the galaxy itself. 5 years had passed since the human diplomatic team had left Zarkon. The gleaming hull of the Earth ship Olive Branch glided into orbit around the now familiar planet, its adaptive camouflage shimmering as it adjusted to the amber light of the Zarkonian sun. On the bridge, General Sarah Chen, now Ambassador Chen, stood with her hands clasped behind her back, a sense of anticipation building in her chest. Beside her, the original team members, Jamal, Aisha, Marcus, and Yuki, watched the approaching planet with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "It's so different," Yuki murmured, her cybernetic eyes zooming in on the surface. Where once there had been clear divides between skyward and earthbound territories, now the landscape flowed in a harmonious blend of styles and technologies. Sarah nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Let's hope those changes are more than skin deep." As they descended through the atmosphere, the true scale of the transformation became apparent. Cities sprawled across the landscape, but unlike the overcrowded metropolises of old Earth, these were interspersed with vast green spaces and nature preserves. Skyward towers reached for the heavens, their bases seamlessly integrated with earthbound subterranean complexes. They landed at a spaceport that hadn't existed 5 years ago, a marvel of engineering that showcased the best of unified Zarkonian technology. As the team disembarked, they were greeted by a sight that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Zelthor and Marillac stood side by side, their once rival factions now indistinguishable in the crowd behind them. But it was the younger Zarkonian between them that truly signified the change. A child, clearly of mixed skyward and earthbound heritage, its scales shimmering with patterns that would have been impossible before. "Welcome back, friends," Zalthor rumbled, his translator perfectly synced to his bioluminescent patches. "We have much to show you." Over the next few days, the human team toured the transformed world. They visited schools where young Zarkonians learned a history that emphasized unity and mutual understanding. They observed scientific laboratories where skyward and earthbound technologies had merged to create innovations that were already changing life across the planet. In one particularly moving moment, they stood in a memorial garden dedicated to all those who had died in the conflicts of the past. Earthbound and skyward families stood together, sharing stories and offering comfort across old divides. "It's remarkable," Aisha said softly. "The level of healing, of genuine reconciliation." Merlac, overhearing, nodded solemnly. "It hasn't always been easy. There are still those who cling to the old ways, who fear change. But with each generation, those voices grow fainter." On their final night on Zarkon, the team was invited to observe a session of the new unified government. The debate was spirited but respectful, with representatives from all backgrounds working together to address global challenges. As they watched, a young Zarkonian legislator proposed a bold new initiative, a deep space exploration program that would combine skyward ambition with earthbound sustainability. 5 years ago, this would have been unthinkable, Jamal murmured. Now look at them. Sarah felt a deep sense of pride and humility wash over her. They had come to this world hoping to prevent a war. They had left it transformed. And in the process, they had learned lessons that would shape humanity's own path forward. As they prepared to depart, Sarah stood once more with Zalthor and Merlac, watching the sun set over the unified Zarkonian capital. "You gave us the greatest gift imaginable," Zalthor said, his voice thick with emotion. "You showed us another way." Sarah shook her head. "We just opened the door. You chose to walk through it. And look at what you've built." Merlac's bioluminescent patches pulsed with pride. "We've taken our first steps into a larger galaxy, and we do so as a united people, thanks to you." As the olive branch lifted off the next morning, the team took one last look at the world they had helped to change. Space stations glittered in orbit, constructions of breathtaking beauty that merged form and function in ways neither skyward nor earthbound could have achieved alone. Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she gave the order to set course for Earth. They were leaving behind more than just a peaceful world. They were leaving a shining example of what was possible when ancient enemies chose to become allies. As Zarkon receded in the view screen, Sarah turned to her team. "Well done, all of you. But our work isn't over." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "New mission, General." Sarah nodded, her eyes gleaming with purpose. "We've seen what's possible here. Now it's time to take these lessons home. Earth has its own divisions to heal, its own challenges to face." As the ship accelerated towards the stars, Sarah felt a renewed sense of hope. They had come to Zarkon to prevent a war. They were returning with the knowledge of how to build a lasting peace. The journey ahead would not be easy, but as they had learned on Zarkon, the most difficult paths often led to the most rewarding destinations. With a united Zarkon behind them and a challenged but hopeful Earth ahead, Sarah Chen and her team set their sights on the next great adventure, bringing the miracle of Zarkon home. The war that never was had given birth to a peace that could change not just one world, but potentially the entire galaxy, and that journey was only just beginning.